The room was silent, yet thick with unspoken truths. At the far end of Buckingham's private drawing-room, King Charles stood before the window, his silhouette framed by the soft grey light of a London afternoon. Behind him, footsteps echoed, measured, deliberate. Prince William entered, his presence commanding yet still tinged with the weight of waiting too long. "Father," William said plainly. No bow, no ceremony. Just the voice of a son who had rehearsed this moment in his mind far too many times. Charles turned slowly. His expression was unreadable, dignified, but not distant. "You've come." "I have," William replied. "And not to talk about charity work or public appearances." The old timber in the room creaked as if reacting to the tension. Charles took a breath. "Go on, then." William stepped closer, his voice steady. "It's time for transition. The world is changing. The crown needs a new voice. A younger one." Charles blinked slowly. "Is that so?" "Yes," William continued, no longer tentative. "I've been in your shadow my entire life. I've studied, watched, learned. But we both know the world isn't listening the way it used to. You still carry the burden of tradition. But I can carry the future." A pause. Then came the words he'd never expected to say aloud. "I'm ready to lead." Charles studied him, eyes not cold, but sharp with memory. "And you believe readiness is all it takes to reign?" "I believe leadership is earned by action, not age." The words hung like frost. The king stepped forward, closing the space between them until only air and years stood in between. "Let me be clear," Charles said quietly. "You do not seize the crown. You inherit it. And I am not yet done." William's jaw tightened. "Then how long must the future wait?" Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "As long as it must. Until I decide the throne is ready. Not the other way around." On the mantel, the old royal clock ticked, steady, unimpressed, eternal. The air between them sharpened, like the edge of a blade that had been hidden too long. William's shoulders squared, his confidence unshaken. "You speak as if the throne is yours alone," he said, his voice low but firm. "But the crown belongs to the people. To Britain. To the future." Charles raised an eyebrow, his face unreadable, though the faint lines on his forehead deepened. "And you assume I have forgotten that?" "No," William admitted. "But I think you've held it so tightly, you've forgotten what it's meant to represent. People want energy. They want clarity. They want something more than tradition wrapped in silence." The king moved closer, his presence commanding without force. "Energy without stability is chaos, William. And clarity comes not from chasing applause, but from standing firm when others falter." William's breath caught for a second. He wasn't expecting calmness, he was prepared for resistance, for anger. But this was the quiet authority that had always made Charles so difficult to challenge. "You think I am old," Charles said, his tone unyielding, "and that my years have dulled my vision. But let me tell you something, it is not age that keeps me standing. It is history. It is the knowledge of what this crown has endured while the world burned, while leaders came and went, while even empires fell." William looked down for a moment, his jaw clenched. "I don't want you to fail. I want to build on what you've done." "But father, how long will you keep carrying it all?" "As long as I must," Charles said simply. "Because leadership isn't about wanting the crown. It's about being prepared to hold it when no one else can." The silence that followed was heavy. Not hostile, but laden with the weight of bloodlines, expectations, and centuries of duty. "Then let me help," William said finally, softer now. "Let me stand with you." Charles gave him a long, measured look. "You'll need more than eagerness to stand beside me." Charles turned his back to the fire, hands clasped behind him. The dancing flame reflected off his cufflinks, gifts from his mother on the day he was crowned. A subtle reminder that thrones weren't claimed, they were carried, brick by brick, through sacrifice and silence. "You see a father," Charles began, voice calm but forged with steel. "But this country sees a monarch. A sovereign not simply draped in robes, but bound by history. You seek to modernize the monarchy, but have you truly looked at what you're trying to wear?" William stayed quiet. There was no easy response to that, only the quiet echo of legacy, pressing against every wall of the room. Charles continued. "When I walk into a room, I do not just carry my name. I carry the echoes of 1,000 years. Every decision, every gesture, scrutinized, dissected, interpreted. I've buried my own desires, son. I've buried opinions, instincts, even friendships, for the sake of the crown. Are you ready to do that?" "I am," William answered. The reply came too quickly. Charles turned. "No, William. You want to be. That's different." William stepped forward, eyes unwavering. "You think I haven't watched? That I haven't studied what it costs to be you? I've seen the toll. On you, on mother, on the family. I know what this role demands." "Then you know it doesn't demand ambition," Charles said sharply. "It demands restraint. When the world shouts, you listen. When they demand emotion, you show calm." The crown does not flinch. Their eyes locked. It was not father and son in that moment, it was institution against aspiration, history facing its heir. "You think I don't carry weight already?" William asked. "Every handshake, every speech, every silent nod, it's training. And I haven't failed." Charles allowed a pause. "And yet, training is not ruling." From the corridor, the faint sound of a palace bell rang. A meeting awaited. A nation never paused. Nor did the weight it placed on those chosen to lead. The corridor outside stirred with muffled footsteps, advisors waiting, protocol ticking. But inside, the room felt untouched by time. Charles gestured toward a nearby chair. "Sit, William. If we're to speak of the future, we do it as men, not ghosts of our titles." Reluctantly, William sat. For all his resolve, he felt the invisible hand of centuries press upon his shoulders. Charles poured tea, himself, deliberately, without calling for a servant. It was a gesture. A subtle reminder that power, at its highest, must still master humility. "You want change," the king said, handing his son a cup. "But change is not a torch to be waved in the air. It's a fire to be tended, carefully. Or else it burns down what you mean to improve." William nodded. "I understand that. But sometimes you need to open a window before the air becomes unbreathable." Charles gave a quiet smile, tinged with respect, tinged with warning. "And sometimes you open the window, only to invite in the storm." There was a silence. Not awkward, but deep. Like a valley between two mountains, both high, both unmoved. "I've seen what waiting has done to you," William said finally. "You waited for the throne your whole life. And when you finally had it, I wonder if it was already too late to make it yours." Charles looked at him with unexpected softness. "You think I am bitter?" "I think you've buried things," William said. "Things a son could feel, even when the world couldn't see." For the first time, Charles's gaze dropped, not in defeat, but in reflection. "Perhaps. But the role demands it. I could not afford to be both father and heir. And now, I cannot afford to be both father and king." William's voice lowered. "Then what can we be to each other?" A pause. A long breath. "We can be what this moment needs," Charles said. "Two men who don't let the crown tear them apart." A gust of wind rattled the old stained-glass windows, drawing their eyes to the shadows dancing along the walls. Neither man moved. This was not a conversation, it was an unveiling. Layer by layer, decades of rehearsed smiles, official handshakes, and unspoken disappointments were being peeled back. Charles stood and walked slowly to the edge of the mantelpiece. His fingers traced the frame of a portrait, one of Queen Elizabeth II. She wore the crown with grace, but also with grief. She never prepared me for this, Charles said, eyes still fixed on the painting. Not truly. She couldn't. She ruled by distance, by mystery. The world allowed her silence. They demanded it, even. William watched carefully, not as a son seeking affection, but as a leader seeking understanding. And yet, Charles continued, when the crown passed to me, I understood something she never said. The throne is not inherited. It is survived. William rose now, slowly, deliberately. Then help me survive it too. Not by shielding me from its weight, but by showing me how to carry it. The fire crackled behind them. For a brief moment, there was something warm in Charles's eyes. Pride, perhaps, but not quite surrender. You believe your time has come, Charles said. I believe the crown must walk forward, not stay rooted in what was, William replied. And I believe I can walk with it. Not behind. Charles turned. And if walking forward means walking without me? William didn't flinch. Then it means you chose the crown over the connection we still have. A stillness settled over the room. Not anger. Not peace. Something older, recognition. You are ready, Charles said at last. But I am not yet gone. William bowed his head slightly. Nor do I wish you to be. For a moment, time didn't feel like an enemy between them, but a thread, fragile and holding. The palace corridors outside had grown noisier, heels clicking, voices murmuring, state affairs resuming their quiet march. But inside, the drawing room remained suspended in a deeper silence, the kind that only exists when words matter more than titles. Charles returned to his seat, crossing one leg over the other. You speak of leadership as if it is an idea. It is not. It is a posture. It is showing up on the darkest day, even when your soul begs for retreat. It is smiling when the cameras click, even as your heart breaks. William nodded slowly. I know that posture well. Charles gave him a look, not skeptical, but searching. Do you? William leaned forward. I was 12 when the world mourned a mother they thought they knew better than I did. I was taught to bow before grief, not feel it. And I did. For you. For the monarchy. Charles's jaw shifted, his hand tightening slightly around the armrest. A memory passed between them without words, Diana, the funeral, the forced composure of a boy who walked behind a coffin while the world watched. I've honored duty, William continued. I've worn the mask. But I also know that the people crave honesty now. They crave something real beneath the robes. Charles sighed, the kind of sigh only a monarch could make, 1,000 expectations exhaled in a single breath. And what would you give them, William? A king who tweets? A sovereign who breaks every mold for applause? No, William said simply. A king who listens. Who evolves. Who doesn't just symbolize strength, but earns it. The fireplace flickered again. This time, Charles didn't look away. There's a difference between bending and breaking, he said. Know it. Or the weight you seek will undo you. I don't want to bend the crown, William replied. I want it to breathe. And in that moment, Charles didn't answer. He just looked at his son, not as a threat, but perhaps for the first time, as his legacy. Evening crept through the windows, softening the edges of the gilded room. The fire had dimmed, but the heat between father and son had not. What had begun as a confrontation was now a negotiation, not over land or power, but over time itself. Charles walked toward the tall bookshelf beside the fireplace, fingers brushing spines worn with royal history. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought I knew how to lead, too. But I mistook impatience for vision." William, standing now, replied, "And what did the waiting give you?" Charles turned, holding an old leather-bound volume. "Perspective. And scars." He set the book down and faced William directly. "You may believe the public wants a modern monarchy. And perhaps they do. But they want it without watching it break apart first. You cannot turn the throne into theater." "I'm not here for theater," William shot back. "But if the crown becomes so afraid of change that it fossilizes, it won't be protected, it will be abandoned." That landed. Charles didn't show it outwardly, but something behind his eyes flickered. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "You think I don't worry about that every single morning? About becoming irrelevant? About watching what I've inherited drift into sentiment?" William's reply came fast. "Then let me help steer it. Not past you. Beside you." Charles looked at his son, a man shaped by loss, duty, and a silent kind of strength. For the first time in hours, the idea didn't sting. "And if you fail?" Charles asked. "Then let the people see it. Let them judge me, not you. That's what real succession should be." There it was, not rebellion, but responsibility. Charles nodded once, slowly. "Legacy doesn't ask permission, William. It waits in silence until one of us is brave enough to reach for it." "And I am," William said. "Not to take your place, but to earn mine." The room grew still again. But this time, the stillness didn't divide them. The clock chimed softly in the corner, 8 bells. Evening had settled in, wrapping the palace in its usual hush. But inside that room, something had changed. Neither man had shifted position, and yet the distance between them felt less. Charles walked toward the window, hands behind his back as he looked into the falling dusk. "When I became king, I thought the crown would make me feel whole. Instead, it reminded me of what it cost me to get here." William remained still, listening not as a subject, but as a son who, for the first time, was hearing truth rather than ceremony. "You've spent your life in my shadow," Charles said. "But I have lived in mine too, the shadow of a queen, of a mother who led with silence and stoicism. There was no room to stumble. No space to be uncertain." He turned now, and his gaze found William's. "Do not envy what I hold. The throne is a lonely inheritance." William stepped forward. "I don't envy it. I respect it. And I respect you, for how long you stood before the world and never let them see the weight. But father, I won't lead the way you did. I can't. The world is louder now. And it demands more than presence, it demands connection." Charles nodded, slowly. "Then find your own way to hold it. But know this, there will always be 2 shadows behind the crown. Yours and mine. The public will never see one without comparing it to the other." "I welcome that," William replied. "Because I'll never pretend I got here alone." There was a long pause. Then Charles extended his hand, not in formality, but in understanding. "You may not wear the crown yet," he said, "but tonight, you've earned your place beside it." Outside, the palace remained silent. But inside, something older than tradition had stirred, acceptance. As Charles lowered his hand, William did not hesitate. Their palms met, not with the stiffness of ceremony, but the quiet grip of generations passing between them. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the crown itself held its breath. Charles stepped back and moved toward the oak cabinet near the fireplace. He opened it slowly and drew out a small, velvet box. Inside lay a brooch, a golden lion, weathered by time. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said. "He wore it when the empire still stretched across maps. He believed it stood for strength." William tilted his head. And what do you believe it stands for now? Adaptation, Charles answered. The lion no longer roars across the world. But it endures. And that, my son, is the true strength of monarchy, not its power, but its permanence. He handed the brooch to William. Not as king to heir. As father to son. William held it delicately. He didn't pin it to his chest, he simply let it rest in his palm, grounding him. You still think I'm too eager, he said. Charles offered a small smile. I think eagerness is the fire of youth. But the monarchy does not burn, it holds. It does not shout, it echoes. William raised his eyes. And do you trust me to hold it without breaking it? A pause. Then a simple, weighty word, yes. They stood in silence again, but now it was companionable. As though, for the first time in years, they were not two men walking opposite directions, but two shadows walking side by side. You won't always agree with me, Charles said. I already don't, William replied, half smiling. But if the people can see that the crown holds disagreement without destruction, Charles said, perhaps they'll believe in it again. William nodded. Then let them see it. A quiet knock broke the moment. Your Majesty, came the voice of an aide. Parliament is ready. Charles glanced at William. Walk with me. This time, William didn't follow, he matched the king's step. They stepped into the corridor together, Charles still slightly ahead, but for the first time, his pace slowed just enough for William to walk in stride. Aides stood aside, sensing the shift in gravity between the two figures. This was not a father and son walking to a formality. It was history adjusting its posture. As they neared the double doors to the chamber, Charles paused. The public, he said, glancing at the golden handles, will not see this conversation. They will not hear the things we've said. But they'll feel it, if we carry ourselves as if something changed tonight. William nodded. Then let's make sure it did. The doors opened with quiet grandeur. MPs, peers, and ministers turned their heads. Phones didn't click, but attention sharpened. The image they saw was subtle, two royals walking side by side, but the meaning beneath was louder than applause. At the dais, Charles addressed the chamber with composed dignity, his voice as measured as ever. But as he spoke of unity, resilience, and continuity, his glance toward William was no longer the cautious glance of succession, it was one of co-stewardship. William stood silently, hands folded, listening. But those watching saw more. They saw a prince not simply waiting, but ready. And they saw a king not defending his reign, but shaping its legacy. When the session ended, Charles leaned in, quietly. The throne will one day be yours, he said. But tonight proved something more important. William raised an eyebrow. That it already belongs to both of us. As they exited the chamber, the cameras caught the smallest gesture, Charles, resting his hand briefly on William's shoulder. Not ceremonial. Not calculated. Just human. Just royal. And with that, the crown, heavy as ever, felt, for once, less lonely in the palace. Beneath the gilded ceilings and centuries of tradition, a quiet shift took place, not in laws, not in lineage, but in understanding. King Charles did not yield his crown. Prince William did not seize it. But what they shared, across a room, across time, was something rarer than power, respect. Because true monarchy is not made in the coronation hall. It is forged in moments when legacy meets listening, when pride makes room for partnership. This was never a battle for the throne. It was a conversation between generations, one that reminded us that history doesn't always move with thunder. Sometimes, it walks forward, side by side.